Welcome to Miss Edelin's World History class. This is Sister Jose Maria with a lecture on the Roots of Judaism, Chapter 2, Section 5. Thus far in our study of Chapter 2, we have encountered a variety of different cultures from the ancient Near East, such as the Sumerians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and the Persians. Today we'll look at a very small group known as the Jews, but yet this small group left an enormous contribution to Western civilization, and that contribution is monotheism, the belief in one God. For our purposes during this lecture, we'll be using the terms Israelites, Hebrews, and Jews pretty much interchangeably, although there are some differences in those terms. The Jewish people date their ancestry back to 2000 BC, when Abraham received a call from God to leave the city in which he lived, which was Ur of Mesopotamia, and to go to Canaan, which would become the Promised Land. There, Abraham was to establish a nation dedicated to God alone. Abraham did this, and his son Isaac and Isaac's son Jacob followed in their father's footsteps. Life was good in Canaan, but eventually a famine came, which forced the small group, these Jewish people, to go to Egypt to find food. No doubt you are familiar with this story from the story of Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, in which Joseph is sold into slavery and becomes a servant in the palace of the Pharaoh in Egypt. And eventually Joseph rises in power to become perhaps the vizier in the Pharaoh's household. And it is through dreams given to him by God that Joseph knows that there's a famine coming, and so he's able to tell the Pharaoh to store up food, so that Egypt becomes this central location where many people come during this time of famine. Unfortunately for the Jewish people, after being there a few hundred years, they were put into slavery. It is not until the time of Ramses II, which is the 13th century BC, or the 1200 BC time period, that the Israelites are able to leave bondage. And they're able to do this because God calls up Moses to become a prophet to lead the Israelites through the Red Sea, out of Egypt, into Canaan, which is the Promised Land. Once the Israelites are back in Canaan, they're able to establish their own kingdom. Saul is their first king, David is the second king, and then Solomon is the third king. So Saul, David, and Solomon are the great kings of Israel. David comes to power in about the year 1000 BC. David desires to build a house for God, or a temple for God, in which to put the Ark of the Covenant. Yet David is unable to do this. Therefore, his son Solomon is given the great privilege of building a capital, which becomes Jerusalem, and then building a temple there for the Lord. Unfortunately, Solomon has some questionable money-raising endeavors in order to build up Jerusalem, and so a lot of people in his kingdom are very angry, and so they revolt. In 922, the kingdom under Solomon has a civil war and a real split, and the north divides off into Israel, and the south becomes known as Judah. The 10 tribes are located in Israel, and those are known as the 10 lost tribes, and then 2 tribes live in Judah. This is a picture of the temple which Solomon built in Jerusalem. This temple on the Temple Mount is the focal point and the place of the greatest holiness for the Jewish people. So the temple is the most holy place, and then Jerusalem is the most holy city in the Holy Land. This is a map of the kingdom at its height under Solomon, and you can see this red line here, which shows the borders of the kingdom at its height. I would also like to point out that this area is known as Israel, which is the north section which broke off, and then this part is Judah. The Israelites at this time are surrounded by a number of other groups in the ancient Near East as well, and so their history is really intertwined with the history of other people in the ancient Near East world. Their history being entwined with those other people didn't always go well. So after the kingdom broke in two, it was weakened, and this weakening allowed other peoples to come in and take over the Jewish people. In 722, the northern kingdom, known as Israel, is taken over by the Assyrians. The Assyrians we have already discussed. They were a very brave group of people dedicated to fighting, but they were very ruthless as well. And so when they came into Israel, they actually had a procedure of removing the people from the land that they would take over so that the people wouldn't rebel. So the people are taken out of Israel, and this is known as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. The south and Judah, unfortunately, didn't fare any better, and in 586, the Babylonians came in and took over Judah. This time is known as the Babylonian captivity because the Babylonians took really the best and brightest people from Jerusalem and brought them to the Babylonian capital and often enslaved them and forced them to work in their palace. The Babylonians themselves eventually fade in power, and the Persians take over the Babylonian kingdom. And it's under the Persians, under Cyrus and then Darius, who allow the Jews to return back to Jerusalem, return back to their homeland. That's just a brief history of the Jewish people, and now let's just look at what contribution the Jewish people have given civilization as a whole. The Jewish people, once again, as we said, are unique in the ancient Near East because of their belief in one God. The term for that is monotheism, or a monotheistic religion, mono meaning one, and theo meaning God. So the Israelites believed in the one true God, and they believed that this God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and is present everywhere. And this is in stark contrast to the polytheism that they were surrounded with. God called the Israelites to enter into a covenant or a mutual binding agreement with God. God would be their God, and the Jewish people would be his people. And so they are known as the chosen people. The Israelites also believe that God promised them a land, and so they call that the Promised Land, and that is Israel today. The Jewish people, building on their understanding that there is only one God, had a unique law and moral code which they followed, which separated them from the other people around them. Their law is known as the Torah, and the Torah also refers to the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. Within the Torah, there are a number of laws which help the Jewish people stay separated from the other people around them. So there are a lot of laws regarding cleanliness or hygiene, also laws regarding food preparation, which are known as kosher laws, and then also laws regarding criminal matters and how they deal with various acts of justice. At the center of the Torah are the 10 Commandments. These commandments were given to Moses on Mount Sinai, and these commandments govern how Jews are to relate to God and then to other men. The Jewish people were also given a gift by God, which are the prophets, and the prophets are special spiritual leaders which God would call upon at various times in the history of the Jewish people. If the Jewish people were not following God closely, then a prophet would be called up to call the people to return to the worship of the one true God. Often the prophets would talk about an important standard of behavior or ethics or a moral code. The moral code that was unique to the Jewish people included things such as the fact that the rich and the powerful should protect the poor and the weak and not take advantage of them, and also the notion that all men are equal under God. The Jewish people, believing in one God, did not see that their rulers were divine. Rather, they saw that their kings or their judges or their prophets were sent to them by God, but they were only human. Thank you for listening to the lecture on Judaism, and we'll continue our discussion of the Jewish people in class tomorrow. Thank you, and God bless.